Senate, and this Senator Charlie Bethel, I think he'll be along here shortly, but their Criminal Justice Subcommittee. And what I would ask you to do, if you would, is try to be respectful of the time. We've got a lot of folks to hear from today, and I welcome you, and we really enjoy your comments. It helps us with our decision that we have to make, and try to be judicious with the money of the people. And we also rely on you for great advice also, and I appreciate that. I would ask the members of the committee to please be succinct in their comments and their questioning. And I believe first up this morning is the Court of Appeals, and we have Judge Phipps with us. Thank you very much for coming into the gauntlet, Judge.
Thank
and
you
could begin at your.
We're happy to be here, and I have with me this morning, as you know, I'm Herbert Phipps, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals. Have with me Presiding Judge Doyle. We have Judge Ray and Judge Ellington, and our clerk Steve Caslin, and our fiscal officer Jan Kelly. I'll make some opening remarks, and they may have something to add on specific issues. As you know, our Court of Appeals has 12 judges. We handle appeals from all over the state, criminal and civil cases. And about 86% of all of the appeals from the trial courts of Georgia come to our court. The main function of the Court of Appeals is the timely and efficient and fair disposition of the appeals that come before it. And as you can see, our budget is primarily for personnel. We have to have the personnel to dispose of the cases. About 75% of our caseload has to do with direct appeals, and the rest of it has to do with interlocutory and discretionary applications. We, as you know, have a two-term rule. That means our cases must be disposed of within 2 terms after they arrive at our court. And that's a very good thing, because as I go to conferences around the country, I hear judges, appellate judges from other states saying that cases are often pending in their court for 2 or 3 years. In Georgia, when an appeal comes to one of our appellate courts, the parties know that within several months they will have an opinion and a decision and a disposition of their case, rather than 2 or 3 years down the line. Now, we had about a 12% reduction in staff and personnel in 2009 because of the economic crisis that we're all familiar with. And in an organization such as the Court of Appeals, the absence or the loss of just one employee makes a difference. And often the other employees are not able to absorb the functions of the employee who was laid off or lost, or sometimes because of some emergency has to be out for illness and such matters. And therefore, from time to time, we've had to bring in part-time people to help us maintain our workload and our function while others were out, or because of the reduction in force that we had. Now, as you can see on our budget, we're asking for money for continuing legal education for our attorneys. As many of you know, our attorneys are required to have 12 hours of CLE every year, and prior to the economic crisis, the court was paying for that, and the court is asking for an enhancement to fund 6 hours of training, because in recent years we've been working with the Atlanta Bar Association to provide 6 hours in-house, but they still have to go out and get the additional 6 hours, and we're asking for some money support, $10,000, to be able to help them with that. It's a requirement of the job. They can't work without that. And even though it's not a great deal of money, we thought that we should, if we can, help them with that. The other items that we're asking, as you can see, we're asking for restoration of a floating staff attorney. And back in the 2008-9, we lost 5 out of 10 staff attorneys. And that means those who were left had to absorb the work. And staff attorneys, central staff attorneys, central staff attorneys, they see the case as soon as they get to the court. They determine jurisdictional matters. They deal with the applications for interlocutory and discretionary appeals and make recommendations to the appropriate panel of judges about these cases. And they have to draft memorandum or proposed orders and that kind of thing. And often when there's a crisis or some emergency in chambers, each judge has 3 lawyers in chambers, but from time to time there's an illness or some kind of emergency where those lawyers have to be out, and previously we would pull people from central staff to help out and help the judges keep up with that caseload. But when they had their numbers reduced substantially, we were less able to do that, and if we had an emergency, we had to bring somebody from the outside, maybe a retired lawyer or somebody like that. So we need those positions. You have given us 2 in recent times, so now we are back up to 7. We've restored 2, we're back up to 7, and we would like to get back up to 10 because we had a reduction in force, but we didn't have a reduction in caseload and workload. So we still need those folks, and we need also restoration of a position in the fiscal office. We lost a position in the fiscal office during that reduction, and this is extremely important because our fiscal officer, Jan Kelly, doesn't have any backup. You know, if she had an emergency, if she had an illness or want to take a vacation, there's nobody who can step in and keep things going. So she just really does a Herculean effort in keeping things going for us, and we'd like to restore that position because we need to get somebody in place who can be there to back her up and help her with these responsibilities. She's had to absorb the responsibilities that person had, and at some point I'm sure she's going to get to the point where she's going to need to retire, and we're going to need to be able to deal with that situation. But we would love to have that position restored also. And the rest of it, as you can see, most of our spending has to do with personnel, but we're also requesting some enhancement for software maintenance and trial court records. We are getting to the point where the trial court's records will be sent to us electronically, and we are in the process. We're just getting into that and easing into that. The clerk can give more detail on how that's going, but we're already talking with the clerks about that and preparing for that because that's coming soon, and we're moving towards e-filing in the very near future. When is that starting this month?
The end of this week.
The end of this week. Then all filings with the Court of Appeals will be done electronically, and that, as you know, necessitates additional expenses. But those are the kinds of needs that we have at this point, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the FY15 or 16, whatever. We have people here who are prepared to respond to whatever questions that you have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Justice. I think we'll stick with 15, and I think our first question is from Representative, formerly Judge Caldwell. Go ahead.
That wasn't me.
That wasn't you?
That wasn't me.
Yeah, I should have figured he would have been the first one. Representative Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Phipps, Judge Doyle, I certainly appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the hard work that the Court of Appeals does. You do a fantastic job. I have an appeal pending in another state, and it's been more than 2 terms when you guys have met, and there's no even, I hadn't heard a whisper. But I do appreciate and I acknowledge that you guys clearly do a great job, and I appreciate that, both as an attorney and as a citizen. And I want to ask you just a little bit about this increased funds for one vacant fiscal office position. That's for half year, right? Okay, and does that include benefits? That's everything. Okay.
Jan,
And likewise on the full-time central staff attorney, that's half year.
Right, they're both effective April 1.
Okay.
And they both have benefits included in that.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Thank you. And thanks again for the hard work you do.
Thank you, Representative Weldon. The chair has a couple of questions on the, just be sure I understand, on the 6 hours, Judge, of the continuing legal education for staff attorneys. Right now, they fund the full 12 for themselves. Is that correct? I mean, they fund 6. I'm sorry, you're asking for the court to fund 6, half of what they need.
Right. Well, the
Okay.
court already provides 6. Judge Doyle is the judge next in line to be chief judge, is sort of supervises the attorneys, the central staff, and that kind of thing. And the court is providing 6, and we are asking for funding to provide for the other 6, to pay for the additional 6 hours that they need, because they need 12. The court already provides 6. There was a time when we provided the whole 12, but we would like to get back to providing the whole 12.
See. On your on the software maintenance, could someone illuminate me a little bit more on that? How old is your system? We ran across with other testimony, for example, that Microsoft, their system was 10 years old. Microsoft would not even support them anymore. Is that what you're facing, or do you know? And I don't want to put you on the spot there. I can
tell you that our system, we have someone who manages our system. I cannot tell you the age of it, except that I know it's been there a very long time. And I can tell you that we are constantly having issues with upgrading, because I work for 12 judges, and they each have a good idea every week on improving the system. And so we try to implement these good ideas. Each one costs something, and some of these are just significant improvements to how we deliver services to practitioners out there. And particularly just within the last month, we're increasing our service to practitioners by having e-filing of emergency motions and applications, something we haven't done before, and all of that costs money. What I'm finding as a clerk is that every time you have a great idea with your computer system, they can always do it, but they always have a bill. And so these requests for monies for improvements, I can tell you they're going to keep coming. I don't think the answer is a new system, because our system works great, but these are enhancements to keep the system working and to come up with new ideas to make the system better, more user-friendly.
Well, I'm sorry.
Jan has some stuff to add to that, a little
Great.
specifically about these 2 numbers on here for you.
The first one, they're 2 separate issues. One of them is, let me just address the first one, the $6,750. That is we just had a new docket built a few years ago. We're continuing adding more applications to that docket, so it's starting to cost more, because they're actually the developers that are developing this system and continuing to develop this system are adding to it, and it's taking more development time. So that's the reason why they've raised the price on us this year. And it will be, there will be price increases in the future, but not every year. It's because there's more applications. They're still building and adding to this whole case management system. So they've increased the price because we're using them more.
And when she says a few years ago, this I think it deals with when we moved to e-filing the docket back in 2009, 10, 11. And so now we're getting all of the applications, which is about 1,000 a year, will be filed electronically. And that's a big number of things that are going to be coming through a system.
It is. I've been very used to dealing on the federal level with it. I'm being roadkill on the information superhighway. I'm amazed at those people that can do it, and I certainly rely on the expertise that I know you need also. The chair recognizes Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking for a real hard question I had, and it has eluded me. I did have, did you, sir, you said you had 12 justices, or judges, my first question was, of course, excluding any from the 912 area, but how in the world do you clerk for 12 judges? But, softly.
My prior job, I spent 32 years in the Army, and I usually worked for just one, maybe two generals. The most challenging job here is you have 12 general officer type folks, and you have to keep them all happy. So how do I answer that with them sitting right next to me? I can't.
Check his pulse, but last year, did you ask for an upgrade of the system in last year's budget? I'm trying to remember. I had it written.
No, I think you might be thinking about the Supreme Court.
Okay, I've got you.
Supreme Court did, so that was them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just asked.
Oh, you mean you folk are not supreme? I didn't. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Chair recognizes Representative Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Phipps and Judge Doyle. What we've done over the last couple of years is we brought you guys up to speed with the e-filing docket, and that I think might have some issue that Representative Williams was referring to, and that's where we've had to bear that cost, and that's where the budget, you might be concerned about that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's probably it.
Thank you, Counsel.
That will have to be the last question, or I'll leave one more question for any member of the committee. We're a little bit over on our time. Hearing none, thank you for your service. I do believe we have the finest Court of Appeals and Supreme Court, for that matter, in the United States, and you're a fine group of people, and I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Write an email.
Thank you.
Looking like somebody got another one going up any day. Next up, Judicial Council, please.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Moore, and the committee will hear your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm here. I am the Marla Moore, the Director of the Judicial Council's Administrative Office of the Courts. I have with me our Budget Officer this morning, Ashley Garner, and I also have the Chair and Vice Chair of the Judicial Council, who just happened to be the Chief Justice and Presiding Justice of the Supreme Court, who are sitting behind me. And you just heard from two more of my Judicial Council members, the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals and the Presiding Judge of the Court of Appeals also sit on that. And as you hear from others this morning, there are others that sit on the Judicial Council.
Well, welcome all.
Our Judicial Council is made up of the leadership of the judiciary. We have 26 members representing all the classes of court. We've provided some information to you to remind those of you who are familiar with us, but also those of you that are new to the committee, about some of the things that we do. We have also provided to you an annual report. If you don't have a copy of our annual report this year, we do have some extra copies with us. We have a number of enumerated duties. We collect statistics, we perform services for judges and court administrators, and we report to the governor and to you and to the public on the status of the Georgia courts. We work under the supervision and direction of the Judicial Council and work with all the classes of courts at the policy level. There are some highlights there of some things that we have done. Our budget for FY 2015 is fairly simple. We are not requesting anything as far as operating for any of our units, with the exception of one, and then we have one pass-through. Well, it's something that the ERS has requested that we put in our budget for the Council of State Court Judges. And you will find that, I believe, on your page 37. And that is an amount of $117,265. The other request that we have as an enhancement is for our County and Probation Municipal Advisory Council. And you know, this council and misdemeanor probation and some of the companies that have been operating in the state handling misdemeanor probation have been in the news quite a bit. SIMPAC is the body that has been working to see that these companies stay in compliance. They also work with the county government programs and see that they also stay compliant. They are asking for 3 additional positions, and this amount that is in here, $88,217, is for a quarter of the year to pay for that. Now, I know that you all are aware that the governor has talked about creating a new department that is going to take probation, and the Criminal Justice Reform Council has recommended that the duties of SIMPAC go into that new organization. We understand that, know that that's a possibility, but in the event that it's not, the fact of the matter is, I feel we need to do due diligence and keep this on the table to make sure that we do get the resources that are needed. And the fact of the matter is, even if these folks do go into this new department, I think they're going to need additional resources. So it's something that I would like for you to consider. And those are our 2 enhancements. Everything else within our budget, we have took a lot of cuts back in 2008 and 9 and 10, and we have managed to maintain and live within that budget. And our associated groups, with the exception of SIMPAC, are all maintaining for 2015.
Thank you, Director.
Any questions?
The chair has one on the, and I'm very, very interested in the compliance monitoring for private probations. That's something, yes, I have paid attention to. And would you happen to know how often the compliance monitors go out to monitor these companies? What kind of oversight do we have?
Well, we have Shavonda Fields here with us, who heads up this group, and she can tell you. And I will say first that I seldom see them in the office, so I believe they're out doing their job most of the time.
Sure. We go out monthly, sometimes more so than that. We go out in teams of 2. We currently have 3 compliance monitors. We were able to fulfill another position in April of last year, and we appreciate that. But we were able to do 2 compliances in one day. So if we go 2 people teams, one is done in the morning and one in the afternoon.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I've answered it. Chair recognizes Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please don't sit down yet. Like the chair, I'm very interested in a compliance monitor for misdemeanor probation. And I'm also, like most of our citizenry, there's a problem in 179 districts, certainly not mine, but let me ask about this.
Sure.
How much the cutbacks first affect your ability to monitor first? Secondly, how has it reached at such a late hour the complaints? I've heard grumblings for years. Why has it taken us so long to get really serious about monitoring private probation, misdemeanor probation? Can you kind of expound upon that some?
Sure.
Excuse me, and what do you see as improvements that are possible because of this request?
Definitely. Well, so I'm going to tackle it piece by piece. Partially, what we are doing, I've been the staff director for 1.5 years now. So what we've done is we've created a system where we're going, like I stated, we're going out. We strategically place where we go. So we don't go to North Georgia one day and South Georgia the next day. And so we are able to do 2 site visits versus in one day versus one a day here, one a day there. So that's how we've stretched what we've had at the time. As I stated, I've been here 4 years. So at one point, SIMPAC had a small turnover because Ms. Garner was promoted. And so there was some time where they had a staff of maybe 2 at one point. And then I came in shortly after that. And I see in the enhancement, if we're allowed to get additional staff, we will be able to look at additional sites. Currently, we're only able to look at your headquarter locations. With 3 people looking at, we have 86 providers contracted with 778 courts. So realistically, we're only able to look at a small amount. If we're able to get this enhancement and gain additional employees, we will be able to have a larger footprint. We will be able to go out and visit additional sites in addition to, because currently as of last year, we did 39 site visits, which is more than what we did the year before, because the year before we did 24 site visits. So with each additional staff member, we're able to have a bigger footprint and able to see additional staff. It is our goal to eventually not just do headquarter locations, but do individual site offices, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Representative Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony and the information you provided us. I want to ask you about the Judicial Council's decision. I think it's is that right? Judicial Council decision that requires the counties, all the judges, Superior Court judges, to have a master recording of everything that goes on in the courtroom, and then in all the cases, all the criminal cases, they have they said that there shall be a transcript filed in each case, even when there's not an appeal. Can you explain to us, and particularly to me, who's going to pay for that, and what's the wisdom behind that rule?
Yes.
And who was the one that came up with that idea?
Is Judge Doyle still here?
I'm still here. I can answer some of this if you want me to.
Yes, I would appreciate it. Judge Doyle served on the committee. We had a study committee that worked for 3 years on looking at court reporting. Court reporters and court reporting have been under the purview of the Judicial Council since 1974. Rules and regulations concerning court reporters, concerning transcripts, concerning business processes. This was a 3-year-long effort to look at, particularly in criminal cases, what was going on. It started out at a request from county commissioners because they could not understand how they were being charged. One county commissioner would talk to in another county and find out that the way they paid court reporters was completely different. It was just all over the board. And so there was a comprehensive look at what is happening, and particularly criminal cases, because that's where the county and where the state pays again and again and again under the old rules. So what they were trying to do was look at, okay, what happens with that and who is responsible? Now there have been some interpretations of the recommendations. I think that people are trying to look at it in the worst possible light, but I will turn it over to Judge Doyle and let her explain a little bit more about how the committee worked.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, and just to answer your 2 questions, neither of those 2 things are actually in the rules. There is no mandate that every court has to have a recording. It is a recommendation for a best practice that a court should have its own backup because of circumstances where court reporters who you're relying on to have the takedown of what happened in court that day die, there are fires, all sorts of things. They're leaving the courthouse. So that was a recommendation to say the best practice is that the court should have control over it, and if you can have a backup recording, and a lot of courts already have this in their system where the judge will press the recording and it's just going. so that if something happened to the court reporter, that you could be able to recapture some of that data. So that was a best practice recommendation. And then there was a secondary part to that which said that if you can't afford your own recording, then maybe utilize your court reporter as your backup and have the court reporter provide you an extra copy of the disc. The main thing that has happened is we moved all the court reporters to, instead of filing paper in the court, they now file it digitally on a disc to go with the whole concept of e-filing. But, and eliminated the payment by the counties of, you're going to pay the court reporter for the copy that goes to the prosecutor, for the copy that goes to the criminal defense lawyer, and all of this. So it is a one-time payment the county makes for, here's my transcript, here's your copy. And then if somebody wants a copy, they come in and the county will print it off and charge them, you know, whatever it is to get copies. So those are the things that happen primarily with this.
So this act by the Judicial Council is aspirational, not mandatory.
Not with respect to the backup. It's a recommendation for best practices, and with respect to the court reporters having to file things electronically, that is mandatory. And the idea being, we're hoping that things will be done quicker. We also put in sort of time frames because a lot of issues with you know, the parties down in the trial courts is getting their transcripts back, and this is all criminal. It's all dealing with criminal. These rules did not deal with civil, and that's because the counties came way back in 2011 to the then Chief Justice Hunstein and said, you know, we don't know what we're paying for. We just don't understand this. Can you streamline it? And then there were several committees over the course of those 3 years that ended up under my chair that came up with some new guidelines and rules.
So the court reporter is still supposed to file the transcript and give them a disc.
Yeah.
And then that's going to have to, that's just going to be maintained, I guess, in the file.
Yeah.
Wherever that is.
Yeah. Sometimes it might be if it's a county that has the resources, it might be done by email. They might send the transcript by email, and then it'll be on their electronic system. If not, it just would be on a disc, and then it's just like a video recording of a stop, you know, with a police officer. You have that in your file.
I hate to cut off this colloquy, but we've got 1 minute left in the hearing. Chair recognizes Chairman Willard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Moore, I want to get clarification on your increased funds for the 3 monitors. You have it in your 15 supplemental budget, but also see it in your 16 budget. Is it either or what you're asking for? Because once you have let me finish. Once you have a slot approved in a budget, it's a continuing funding. So is it for 6 people or just 3?
3.
Well, why are you doing it both?
In case we don't get it in.
Well, that's what I say, either or, which my question.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, if we get it in 15, then it's no longer an enhancement in 16.
Chair recognizes Senator Cowsworth, I believe. Or Hightower, Representative Hightower, sorry.
Just playing on what Representative Weldon said, I'm hoping that this court had something else going on when I was there that day, but I went to a court, and it was a Superior Court, and the judge was working with the DAs, and he would not let court go on until the DAs had laid out a plan on how the court reporter was going to get paid for taking all this down, and then stopped court and made the DA go meet with the court reporter and asked the court reporter in open court, are you satisfied with how the DA is going to pay you? Court reporter then said no, and the judge said, well, I guess we're just going to hold up court for today. And I'm sitting here going, what in the world is happening right now? And then finally the DA went back up, and they worked it out so that the DA was going to be responsible for paying for all these recordings. And what I'm thinking in the back of my head is, well, if this is going on everywhere, they're going to come to us and say, we got to pay this because it's now in their budget and the judges are forcing them to have this. But you're saying that should not have happened that day. And I've been back since then. They didn't do it that way, so hopefully they've straightened this out. So, but I know there for a minute there were some courts, because I was there that day, that
Was this a visiting court reporter, not the normal official?
this was the
the
normal judge, normal court reporter, but I've been in that court since then. They're not doing that anymore, so I'm hoping it was just a bump in the road, so to speak. But there for a minute, I was getting very nervous as to what that potentially was going to do to our budget.
No, I don't have any idea why that would have happened.
Okay, thank you.
Last question. Chair recognizes Representative Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll ask this question. I'm happy to take an answer later in writing or in some other convenient way. It's about the SIMPAC. I'm curious to know what the investigators are looking for when they do their headquarters inspections. I mean, are they just auditing financial records or timesheets? Are they looking at policy and procedure statements? And how, if at all, do the investigators ever interact with probation officers or even probationers? And I know that's kind of a big question, and I'm happy to, at the chairman's discretion, to take that answer offline.
I think it'd be a good idea if we do it. We're already about 3 minutes over. If you could do that, I appreciate it. The juvenile, we got a communication from the juvenile courts are running late. If the superior courts could come up, please, and thank you for your testimony and thank you for your service. What's that? That's a good point. I didn't think, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Christian, good. Good morning, Judge. Welcome very much, and we're ready for your testimony when you are.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having us. I'm Mary Staley. I'm a Superior Court judge in the Cobb Judicial Circuit. I'm also president of the Council of Superior Court Judges, and I'm here on their behalf. I have with me Charles Miller. He's with the Council of Superior Court Judges, and he's our budget manager. I also have Bob Natikow with me. He's the 8th District Court Administrator from the 8th Judicial Administrative District. David Mixon is also Court Administrator for the 2nd Judicial Administrative District, and he's with us in the audience as well. As to the amended budget, we have before you 2 requests. The first request I'll address. The second request applies to the administrative districts, and I'll ask Mr. Natikow to address you on that. We are asking for an increase of $18,051. The request is for restoration of 3 furlough days that are remaining in the base budget. We had 6 furlough days included as a reduction in the fiscal year 2012 base budget. Funding was added to restore 3 of the furlough days in fiscal year 13, and this request for this year is to restore the funding for the remaining 3 so that our administrative staff statewide aren't faced with furlough days. Okay, I stand corrected. I'll do the next one. And then Mr. Natikow will be here to answer any questions. We have an additional operational funds that we're requesting of $50,000. The funds are to restore combined cuts from previous budget years. The JAD budget is broken internally into 3 categories. We have salary and benefits representing 85% of that budget, rent, utilities, and 7%. Operational spending is 8%. The first 2 categories are fixed. That leaves 8% of the total judicial administrative operating budget to pay for gas, supplies, maintenance, repairs on vehicles, travel equipment, postage, all other operational expenses. The operation category has been cut by 52% in past and has severely limited what the DCAs, their ability to travel through the circuits in the districts and to repair and replace aging equipment, provide judges with all essential services required of their position. Georgia is a very diverse state in terms of the judiciary and the courts. In a circuit like mine, there's 1 county, 1 courthouse. Everyone comes to that courthouse. We don't travel. But within the 7th Judicial Administrative District, and I'm a member of the 7th, you have our DCA who travels from Dalton over basically into Rome, Alabama, down to Cobb County, and covers that entire area, providing for alternative dispute resolution services, divorcing parent seminars, making sure that the courthouses have adequate security, adequate computerization, adequate technology, and as simple as a small courthouse in a rural community may not have a computer or have a computer breakdown. And if you're a judge traveling there and people coming there for court, you're going to have that equipment if anything is going to be accomplished. These people make sure that happens. And this amount of money that we're asking for is a very small amount to make sure that we are able to provide those services to citizens. And I think we can see, particularly in the more rural and remote parts of the state, that access to justice is critical and difficult and complicated for the people that need those services. And the administrative court, the district court administrators do that well with very limited resources. So we're talking about services to people who desperately need to be able to get child support, who are perhaps victims of battery and need protective orders. And we're talking about the places that they go to have fundamental services that deal with public safety and deal with children's issues and very important quality of life issues for our citizens. Would you like to add to that, Mr. Natikow? No, I think you did very well. Well, I hope y'all do too.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Chairman Willard.
Yes.
Good morning, Judge.
How are you?
Fine. How are you doing?
Good.
Following up on that, I know we've had some discussions, you and I have, and I want to raise this point because the old districts, that are sub-judicial districts, were done under the former, back in the 70s, I believe, apportionment of congressional districts. That's the same pattern it was done. And it seems to me, because of shifting populations and shifting needs over the years, has it ever been considered by the Judicial Council, Superior Court judges especially, as to whether we need to do some kind of adjusting and reframing of what are the boundaries? So as you talk about, some of these areas are widespread, trying to govern as well as service those areas. Is there looked upon as being something that may be studied as a way of performing better services through these district administrators?
We actually looked at that when Justice Hunstein was Chief Justice, and that was about, I want to say 4 years ago. And that was brought up. We took a very hard and serious look at it. It's a difficult situation.
Why?
Well, I think, well, I hate to go back to the Civil War, but I think it might have to do.
And maybe.
Well, it might have to do with Reconstruction. And if you recall, the reason we have so many counties in the state of Georgia is because it's harder to travel in the north than it is in the south. And the south is big and spread out, and the north part of the state is tight and compact, but getting from place to place is difficult. And the 9 districts.
On 4-lane highways.
Well, I was talking to one of our judges yesterday, and he said, "Mary, you just don't understand my situation. I have to go to Hazelhurst from Brunswick, and it's 90 miles, and that's to get to court and start court." We looked at it 3 years ago to try to do some shifting and redirecting and do that. But what we found with resources is almost every one of these districts is anchored by an affluent community. And so like in the 7th, which I can speak to more informed than any other because it's my district, Cobb County, you've got Rome, you've got Dalton. You've got 3 communities with better resources than other places in that district. We don't use the services of the district court administrator in Cobb County particularly. We have an affluent community.
Right.
They support our court. We have a court administrator. That frees up our district court administrator to service and provide for the less affluent communities. So each of the 10 districts has one big community, affluent community, that frees up the resources to the lesser affluent communities.
Okay.
So restructuring it might work, but it ended up pulling away the affluent resources to supplement that community. And we did look at it, and we're concerned about it.
Thank you. May I follow up on another question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
I noticed that and I didn't ask the justices who are still here or the Court of Appeals judges, I may put it to you, as the pay raise issue that we have in here, which is the increasing funds for a judicial salary increase. Do the courts have an opinion, I guess in this case superior courts, have an opinion that this pay raise can be changed by a matter of appropriation as opposed to a statutory change?
We were hoping that might be true.
Well, have you considered what is the legality of it? Because my question is, your constitutional officers. As I read it, there can only be a change of those salaries of constitutional officers by statute. Has that been looked upon, or
That's also
my
as the
fear is
chair.
this: if we make a change without going through statute, someone may challenge it.
Well, Legislative Council looked at it and said that that wasn't an option, and that's why we're going to.
Was or was not?
Was not.
Was not an option. Okay.
So we're of the opinion it is not, but we had hoped. But we, I mean, in all candor, we had hoped it was explored, but we were advised, and I think we sort of suspected that it had to be statutory because we are constitutional officers.
Right. Okay.
Chair has looked at that. I think we can move for cost of living, that sort of thing, but I believe it would take legislation to do a change in the salary. So,
and we respectfully agree with that.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on your testimony, I can tell that you're aware, but it is unfortunate how different justice is in Georgia. I mean, I got a chance to travel this entire state, and one of my disadvantages is being a non-lawyer on this committee. I don't get any interaction with judges as a rule outside of the Atlantic Judicial Circuit. But some of the things, and I listen to, it's just absolutely unbelievable. And I want to see any plans to adjust this with some of your requests. Simple things like child support. I'm in a heavily military district. Person gets out of the Army in Hinesville, Georgia, moves to another circuit, even in Georgia. Difficult. If he leaves the state, impossible. I have 3 constituents that have been waiting for child support in over 3 years. Some circuits you can go and bang. Others, nothing. It's not fair. I never hear about it really seriously, and I've seen no changes in 14 years in this legislature. And it is a shame, the differences in the different circuits in this court, how they react to problems.
You all, to your great credit, have done, in my opinion, some things that have been very strong in the enforcement of child support recovery. And one of the things that you did, and I don't know the years past, was you changed the law on abandonment, and you made it, if a person left the state of Georgia and did not support their children, you made that a felony so that extradition would apply. And at least in my circuit, and it's often DA dependent, but our district attorney takes it extremely seriously. I had 3 cases last year, and I'm one of 10 judges. So other judges were seeing it as well, where people were brought back to Georgia, charged with felonies, prosecuted. Some went to jail, and others were put on very strict orders with court appearances to enforce that they pay their child support. There is a disparity, and some of it's reflective of community attitudes, which are different around the state toward the collection of child support. That's unfortunate for those children because they deserve, in my opinion, better. But different communities have different cultural attitudes toward things, and they elect district attorneys that they support, and district attorneys often make that decision. But to your great credit, you all have addressed that, I think, in what I find to be a very efficient and effective way.
One follow-up, please.
Yes,
And I'd be glad to speak with you offline on this. But
I would
I've got some, that it is, in spite of the changes, I know a 6-figure income guy right now has not paid child support in 2 years. And it's just tossed around, and people get put on hold, and nothing happens. I'd like to talk to you about that because it's not a rare occurrence.
Thank you,
and that child is suffering.
Of course.
Thank you, Representative Williams. That will have to be the last question. You may want to ask offline. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you all very, very much.
Call the juvenile court judges, please. I'm sorry. Sorry about it. Welcome. Glad to have you here, and the committee will entertain your testimony.
Members of the committee, thank you very much. I'm Eric John. I'm the director of the Council of Juvenile Court Judges. I have our president for this year, Judge Lane Bearden from Gordon County, Cherokee Circuit, and then Kirsten Wallace, who's our budget director. I wanted Judge Bearden to come today because I wanted him. A lot of people in this room and a lot of you work really hard on the juvenile code, which is now a year old technically, and I just wanted him to give you a little sort of up-to-date where we are and what's going on with the code. And I know Chairman Willard and Senator.
Yes,
and I want to start out saying how appreciative personally I am that the juvenile court judges across the state have embraced this type of change, that recognize there was a better way of handling these problem youth than just put them in a short-term detention or some other alternative programs, because I know there was lacking of funds, and the state has stepped up and made a change there, but the fact that the juvenile court judges and their court administrators across the state have said, in the counties, we want to take these changes and make it happen, and I think it's really improving substantially the system we have in Georgia for these type of troubled young people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for those comments, Representative Willard. We were successful, I believe, because this body and the governor's office consulted with the courts before implementing this. Yes, we have 244 single-spaced pages of new code. We're the first year into it. I think it's been embraced by the courts, and we don't have hard statistics on the figures you were mentioning yet, but it looks like the detention rate is down nearly 40%. With amazing savings, and with reduction of the crime rate. I can speak to my own district, and Representative Coomer is one of my representatives. We went from 22 detentions in either boot camp or short-term placement or commitments to the state in 2012 to 2 last year. Our recidivism rate has dropped, nationally averages about 60% to less than 5%. So alternatives to detention can be amazingly successful, but it has required adoption throughout the state. And it's difficult in Atlanta, it's difficult in some of the smaller cities to try and emulate those numbers. But we've really tried to embrace that as hard as we can. And the judges and the committees and over 150 different juvenile court judges in the state have worked very hard to try and embrace that philosophy. And we really appreciate the support of that.
Thank you.
I would just add that we have a lot more work to do. But thus far, we are implementing the code very rapidly. There are very few problems. We have a second rewrite that's going on with just a few minor changes. Overall, we've increased the number of hearings substantially on the child abuse dependency side, but the delinquency cases are actually going down some with the alternatives to detention. So we appreciate, again, your support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions from the committee? Could you address for the chair, I noticed grants to the counties for juvenile court judges, both increasing funds for the grants to the counties as well as increasing funds to reflect an adjustment in the employer's share of the judicial retirement system. I think that's self-explanatory, but the need for increasing the grants to the counties, could you address that in the amended budget?
Pursuant to the Code Section 111552, that's the creation of or an additional Superior Court judges. The grants to counties are based on how many Superior Court judges are in each circuit. So the way that the juvenile court judge's salary is determined is the Superior Court judge is created, so then a portion of funding is then sent to the county to cover a portion of a juvenile court judge position that may be created or has already been created. It doesn't pay, the juvenile grants to counties don't pay the entire juvenile judge's salary.
So it helps,
based on a formula.
essentially helps reimburse the counties.
That's
Is that what I'm hearing?
correct.
Do you have a sense on, are there counties not requesting this? Are more counties requesting the grants? I have heard something about some counties not engaging.
No, there's only one county.
There's one circuit that is not entitled to the funding because it is, the juvenile courts are handled by Superior Court.
I see.
That's the Geechee circuit. Other than that, as a period of time has progressed, and in particular, Representative Willard, Fulton County picked up a third judgeship, so they started taking more of the state funding for that third judgeship.
As a question on that, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Is most of the funding done through CJCC as far as the local grants to the counties and juvenile courts? Is that still the system?
The funding comes to our council and we disperse it to the particular circuits, and then of course the counties join in supplementing to match the salary.
But is the funding coming through CJCC's appropriation as opposed to juvenile court judge appropriations?
It's coming through our council.
It is specifically an appropriation to your council. Okay.
It's a little over $5 million.
Okay.
And that was established in 2000, I believe. And it hasn't changed since that time.
That's about $7 million now.
That's our total budget. That's with the council budget, our internal staff, and then $5 million is for the grants to counties that go to the counties to pay for the juvenile judges' salaries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, you have managed to get us back on time, which is the chair appreciates, and thank you for your service. I call my good friend, Chief Justice Hugh Thompson, Supreme Court of Georgia. Mr. Chief Justice, welcome.
Thank you very much.
The committee will entertain your testimony.
Let me say, first of all, how much we appreciate your taking the time and the interest to learn about our request for budget, and we appreciate that very much. I have with me this morning, for those of you who don't know him, Presiding Justice Harris Hines from Cobb County, and Justice Keith Blackwell, and also our clerk, Ms. T. Barnes, and we have our fiscal officer, Ms. Regina Jones, and our chief deputy, Ms. Tia Milton. So we're well covered this morning. I hope we can answer any questions you might have.
I'm sure you can.
The amended requests for 2015, I think, are very modest, very simple, very straightforward. We learned after the session last year that the Department of Public Safety was not seeking from us sufficient funds to fund the expenses of the trooper that's assigned to us. And we promised them that we would request that increase, that enhancement, to cover that. And that's the first item we asked for. The second item that we asked for is a legal research increase. As many of you probably know, a few years ago we dismantled our library. We do all of our research electronically now. It's cheaper, I think, for the state and much quicker for us as well. So that's the second request. I think that's a very modest increase, but that's an increase occasioned by the company that we deal with.
Mr. Chief Justice, not to cut you off, have they gone up on your rates on that?
Yes.
I assumed that was the case, but
yes,
I wasn't sure.
That's it.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
The third is an increase for LexisNexis Matthew Bender, who is the publisher of our decisions. Now, we're responsible, and through our budget goes the cost of the reporter's office. They report for us, but they also report for the Court of Appeals, and this is an increase that they have asked for, and something over which we have no control. But that is that third request. The fourth request is a new charge for our internet usage by AT&T, and this runs our computers, runs our electronic docket, and this is something our vendor is requesting from us. Something we negotiate but have ultimately no control over. And anyway, I think it's really very modest increase as well. The fifth is our request for an increase by our vendor, again, for e-filing that is done by attorneys that come to our court. We are a 100% e-file court now, and we're proud of that, but with that goes some expense, and our vendor is asking for an additional funds. Those are the only enhancements for our FY15, and those are all things that we have essentially no control over.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Questions from the committee? This may be the easiest hearing we've had.
Well, I count that you are prepared.
We waited a little too. We waited a little too long. Chair recognizes my co-chair.
Anything to do with pay raise, I'm going to call on my colleague, Justice Black.
We'll be getting to that.
Thank
Senator,
you. Most junior justice gets to answer that question. I know how that works, being the youngest brother in a family. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, I just have a question. You indicated that, and I don't disagree with the characterization from a nominal standpoint. You indicated that the network cost that y'all were going to be asked to pay from AT&T was modest. Can you give me an idea? I know that's an increase. What is the scope of that total contract? That is, say, $31,000. Wouldn't it be nice if their generosity continued? Okay, so that's a totally new line. Okay. Thank you.
thank you.
I just want to clarify that also. So the $31,000 will be a continuing annual fee.
Yes.
Wow. My $59.95 a month's looking good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Chair recognizes Chairman Weldon.
Just to be clear about, that's an annual fee of $31,000. So if we put half of that in the amended budget, that would take care of that do you have to pay that right now? Is that bill due and owing for $31,000?
Right. This is prorated, started back in September 1.
Okay. So that is prorated. That's not an annual fee then.
This 31 is prorated. The annual is 37.2.
Okay.
So it's not going to be like 62. That's not for half.
No. It started back in September, 10 months. Well, thank you very much.
For your service.
Thank you very much for hearing us.
Let's see, we got the Supreme Court. Public defenders, next. Welcome, Mr. Saxon, Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good
Thanks
to see
for
you.
having me. We, in an effort to prevent you from being completely bored by listening to me, we did prepare a brief handout. I still have no doubt that it'll be boring, though.
Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Travis Sackerson. I'm the director of the Georgia Public Defender Standards Council, the agency that administers and budgets for all of the circuit public defender offices around the state, as well as the other 6, what we refer to as opt-out counties. And we're also involved in a certain degree of oversight for those counties as well. We do have a brief description of what we oversee since the legislation that y'all gave us about 4 years ago, that the Director's Office in particular took over some new duties. And so since then we've worked very hard to analyze all of our programs and try to make them as effective and efficient as we could. And I believe we have made a great deal of progress with that. And so I appreciate all of the support that we've gotten from most of you. I've had the privilege of working with most of you over the last 4 years. And so I appreciate your support again. We, so that you have an idea of what we're talking about, we handle 85 to 90% of all the criminal cases in the state, 120,000 odd cases a year. When I say criminal cases, that includes juvenile, and so that's sort of a ambiguous term when you talk about that. We have a budget this year that is still does have an increase and includes an issue that we've been dealing with for a long time, and I know we've been working with a number of you on that issue as it relates to conflicts. Hopefully that will close the door on that issue. But we are an executive branch agency. We've gone through the OPB process, and we've been working with them as well in the governor's office for years on these issues. So this is the OPB's recommendation. We also this year completed the ZBB process and moved our agency into zero-based budgeting for all of our programs. So hopefully we're much more accountable and transparent than we've ever been before. I guess the last page really speaks to the big issue, and I think Chairman Atwood, you'd asked me to address both the amended 15 and 16 budgets, which should be simple because it's really the same issue for the bulk of the increase. This is a funding to address conflict of interest cases for our agency that in April of 2013 the Supreme Court ratified the State Bar's Formal Advisory Opinion 10-1 that sort of changed the way that our offices could handle conflict of interest cases and defined our offices as a law firm. That required us to handle about 2/3 of those cases. As you can see, there's been about a 2/3 increase in year on year is what that number is on that handout, increase in the number of conflict cases, cases that we may have been handling in office before. Now we've had to use outside counsel. For the most part, that involves using contract attorneys, but we do whatever's the most effective and efficient way to do it in each circuit. Each circuit's very different in how they approach that and need us to respond to that. That's an increased cost. The governor has been very responsive and allowed us to pay for that increase through emergency funding for the last year and a half. All this really does is increase our continuation budget by the number that we've been using to get through the year on conflict cases from emergency funding.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you for being with us today. I want to ask you, as a follow-up to that, a couple of things. First of all, of the total budget you have, is it now covered completely by the fees that were set up to be assessed on filings with the courts? And what is the amount that's coming in, if you can give us a current figure on that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And the chairman's referring to what we refer to as the Indigent Defense Fund, which is 4 or 5 fees or fines that were originally set up to fund the agency. It's probably averaged about $40 million over the last 3 or 4 years. and maybe I think had an all-time high the first year or two of about 47. Those fees and fines have fallen off considerably, and so we're on pace to be a little less than 40 million this year. And as you can see from our state appropriated funding, that the appropriated funding does exceed the Indigent Defense Fund by about $7 or $8 million, depending on 15 or 16 year that we're talking about.
Thank you. If this is a follow-up to explain something, you really can't have a conflict situation where you have a public defender and another circuit come into an adjoining circuit, primarily because all these public defenders are assigned to courts.
Yes, sir.
Which are going almost on a daily basis.
Right. Yes,
so
sir.
to have them come out of one circuit to go to another circuit, regardless of how close it may be, is really impractical, isn't it?
Yes, sir. We've looked at everything that we could possibly do to prepare for this. We reorganized the Capital Defender's Office in preparation for this so that we could avoid millions of dollars in conflict cases there. Everything we could do, and we continue to have projects, but we did look at several circuits using what we call cross-circuit representation, using public defenders from one circuit to the next. And over a certain period of time, we were able to do it, but over the long haul, it just caused significant delays in both circuits.
Right.
And so cases were backing up, and really the efficiency of this model loses.
One last question. Have we considered what you had previously as a model, which was having a conflict public defender serving in certain areas on a full-time basis as opposed to contracting out? Because I think in your metropolitan areas, we know there's a load sufficient to carry full-time employment of a public defender for just conflict cases.
Right. Yes, sir. And I would tell you, Mr. Chairman, that there are 49 answers, 49 circuits, 49 answers to how we do it. And in some places, it is more effective to have offices. And in those circuits where we have the funding, we have tried to do that. There are several other circuits where it's just not very effective. When you have multi-county large circuits, it's
Please, I understand it won't be, but I say in certain areas, certainly in metropolitan areas, as opposed to putting all this funding into contract,
right,
as to use it to increase and have a full-time position,
yes, sir,
handling just conflict cases.
Right. We do have some offices where that is being done, yes, sir.
Okay.
Atlanta, the Atlanta circuit, your circuit, is a good example.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that the fees, the add-on fee has been falling off for the last few years. Do you know why?
Well, I just spoke to the Council Superior Court judges, and we were talking about that with some judges, and most of the fee generates from civil action filing fees, and it just appears that more people are using magistrate court than Superior Court and state court. That at least anecdotally, that's the Clerks Cooperative Authority tracks this for us, but it's difficult to tell exactly why the change. But it does seem that fewer people are using or suing each other in state and Superior Court.
So this is not an add-on, like a criminal penalty add-on, like we see in a lot of other areas. There's not a public defender add-on to sentences.
There is. It's just that is not the large part of what is the indigent defense filing fee or indigent defense fee. That most of those fees are waived. We have indigent clients. The judge makes a determination whether there's an ability to pay, and so waiving those fees, and even if they weren't waived, it wouldn't be as significant as the civil action filing fee is.
Thank you.
And I can break out those numbers. And unfortunately for you, I think you're on our Legislative Oversight Committee, so you'll have to see me again.
Thank you so much for reminding me.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hightower.
Morning. I didn't see in your budget, and you may have it somewhere. Are you requesting any funds for travel?
We are not. I know that and since I see that Chuck Speos is not here today, then I guess I can say anything else.
Do any of y'all staff do you provide any of your staff with automobiles? Several people in each office, do they have automobiles?
We do. We have a sort of an aging fleet. We've moved into the Concur travel system, or we begin this month the Concur travel system, which is an additional cost for us. Hopefully there'll be a savings to match the cost for the administration of it. And we do have a nominal travel budget, but we just have so many other issues. Frankly, if we don't secure this funding and close the door on the conflicts issue, we won't stay open in April, May, and June of this year. And so these were the most dire issues. This doesn't talk about the increases in juvenile cases that we've had to assume, or the fact that the district attorneys make $10,000 more a year than our people, or the elected DAs make $20,000 more a year than our people, or any of the other issues that I'm sure they would like us to be talking about around the state. But we've had to assume those additional costs on travel this year. So.
And your staff still has to go to training and keep
Absolutely.
up their CLEs,
Yes,
and they're
sir.
just
we
like
have a
anybody
statutory
else.
mandate to train them. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, Representative. I do deeply appreciate your approach to budgeting. I do. You've been very, very controlled and very focused, and I enjoyed our time together yesterday also. Any other questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Hearing none, thank you, sir, for your service and for the people that work for you. Appreciate it. And Department of Law. General, welcome. Good to see you again.
Great to see you.
And we'll entertain your comments when you're ready.
Okay, I'll make very brief comments. Representative Powell already told me you had a question for me, so I'll look forward to it at the appropriate time. With regard to amended 15, we appreciate the beefing up you permitted us to do last year on the civil recovery side of the Medicaid fraud unit. As you know, for each individual, it brings in a lot more money than the cost of that employee. So it is a revenue gain to DCH in that process. We also appreciate the salary enhancement package. I was at one point of the last fiscal year losing a lawyer a week, so that was very much appreciated. We actually hired a law clerk from a Fulton County Superior Court judge who was supposed to start last week, but the Thursday before he got an offer for far more, so took care of that potential opening. So it's still a challenge, but it is better having had the enhancement from last year. With regard to 16, it's basically the same. The only difference is we had talked to the governor's office about adding an additional prosecutor, a full-time prosecutor with sex trafficking. Works already with PAC, works already with the GBI, goes around the state, not only dealing with indictments, but a lot of training for law enforcement, and that's much appreciated. As you know, in the governor's budget, he's proposed moving the governor's office of consumer affairs to our office. That is the governor's request. It is the norm. I believe that Hawaii, Wisconsin, Utah, and Georgia are the only 4 states where that entity is not within the state attorney's general office, but that emanates from the governor rather than from our office. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. If they're hard, Ann Bentley will handle them, and if they're easy, I'll touch them.
Thank you, General. Any questions for our Attorney General? Hearing none. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I do. Chairman Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
Mr. Attorney General. What's it going to take for you to be able to staff and have a realistic ability to maintain some integrity in your staffing and to reduce some of this the loss you're having? I know there's going to be some turnover, but if it could be a year or 2, that's better than what you have now.
Well, is it 2006, Ann, that the budget office prepared a study suggesting in 6 that there ought to be about a 2 or 3 year phase-in to get our starting salary to 65. Our starting salary is 50. It actually went downhill under the recession because as our budget was cut, we needed to naturally reduce the starting salary. The part that scares me the most, Representative Weldon, is the lawyers that are with us, say, 10 years, the lawyers that know what they're doing and you could put them in the courtroom alone and they're hardworking, And they're the first ones to go, because when state agencies or other public law offices can immediately offer them a $25,000 pay raise, I can't compete. So, for instance, the general counsel for the banking commissioner was a great lawyer in our office, couldn't compete. When our solicitor general got an excellent request, couldn't compete. You're talking about DA's offices, solicitors' offices. But, frankly, I haven't come to this committee requesting additional dollars because I understand the state didn't have it. And it was my hope that as the state's economy improved, this committee would assist me at that time. But, candidly, when the GBI doesn't have enough agents and other folks don't have enough of what they need, I thought it was inappropriate for me to go up to y'all saying, treat me better than the other. So I think there are numerous agencies that have those same needs that we have, and we look forward to your help if and when the time is appropriate.
Thank you.
Chairman Bowman.
And following up on that, what is your today, as we sit here, authorized number of attorneys for the office?
It's either 150 or 151.
And what do you have now as actually employed?
I think we have about 5 openings as we speak.
Only 5?
Yes.
Well, that's not too bad.
No, absolutely. It's interesting, assistant public defenders make less than our lawyers. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of former assistant public defenders. Well, on the food chain, we're higher than they are.
They move up, then they go to the district attorney's office. Okay.
Absolutely, but it's true. I mean, it does work that way. And candidly, as you know, Chairman Willard, those assistant PDs spend a lot of time in court, and they're really good future lawyers for our office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your 10-year lawyers, General, do you have an estimate of what their average salary would be at the 10-year mark, roughly? I mean, I know you can't.
Well, for 6 years, they didn't get any increase. Mm-hmm. So I'd say my guess, and it is a guess, sir, would be 65, and that would be because they started, for them to have been here 10 years, many of them would have started at 55 before the reduction to 50.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the committee? Hearing none. General, thank you for your service.
Thank you very
and for
much.
all the people that work for you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Williams, I'm sorry I didn't see that.
I didn't know the salary base. It's not a question. It was just interesting that we had in our joint meeting there are welders' jobs at $100,000. It's going to be interesting. You're going to have some competition from welders for your staff if we continue where we are.
Representative, I'm just guessing, so it's a guess, but I don't think I have 10 lawyers that make 6 figures.
Is that right?
I mean, we have a huge compression issue as a result of the economy. I mean, the lawyers I need to retain the most are the lawyers I'm at most risk of losing.
Okay. You see that?
Your folks are indeed dedicated public servants. I know it. Thank you, General.
Thank you.
This concludes this committee hearing, joint committee hearing. Thank you.